Greetings, Summoners. Cosmic here, and welcome back to another Battle Spirits Saga video. And today we're going to be talking about Shadow Drain. And I wanted to do things a little bit different for this video. So there's going to be a high-level overview of the deck list up front, and then getting into a series of games. So if you like this kind of updated style where it's talking about the high-level overview and then getting into games kind of put together in one, definitely let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, here's a list, and let's get into it. So within Battle Spirits Saga and Battle Spirits in general, I've talked about this a lot, but a lot of it goes back to what is your key spirit and what do you want to be doing? And I gotta say, Dread Knight Nemesis is quite a bit better than I thought it was going to be, but I wanted to build a deck around this. And why is it? So this deck does two things a lot differently than other purple decks. One, it can attack very well. So as you're gonna find out later on, its shadow units that you put in this deck, or shadow spirits, can get quite large from a BP comparison, making them very easy to attack with and get in damage. But then also, Dread Knight Nemesis is still going to give you that flexibility that you would want in an X-Rare or just pure strength. So getting to draw two cards, getting to kill a Beldegor after it attacks and after it swings for like 8k, draw two cards, attack with a 4. If they take it to hit, they obviously lose life. If they kill the 4k, your Beldegor just comes back and it's like an 8k again. So there's a lot of recycling that you want to do with this deck. And then also, just a level 2 and 3 effect, when destroyed, your opponent selects one of their spirits and destroys it. So it's also Deadly Balance on a body. And we know how good Deadly Balance has been. And again, 10,000 power is a lot of power to put into a purple X-Rare and hit some really nice numbers when you attach a couple, Nexus cards behind it. So I was like, you know what? Let's build a shadow deck. Let's try to get the most value out of this possible. And where did that lead us, right? So you have the Abandoned Guillotine. And I know this is not a card that I was that excited about early on. And, I said, hey, we need more shadows. And I'll be honest, this deck definitely wants one or two more main shadow cards that you can put in and get the bonus. But I think overall, this is a nice showcase of like a high level overview of where they can go. And then if we get more shadow cards, again, in either Tournament Pack 1 or EXO1, the promo set that's coming out in June, this could really pop off. So my main motivator was Dark Knight Palamedes, getting to attack exhausted units, right? When combined with Guillotine, it's a very obvious combination, right? Guillotine forces your opponent to attack. Palamedes can get really, really big really quickly for only 2 cores on him and just punish your opponent for attacking. Now, I will say I wish there was more when destroyed triggers in this deck that we can really capitalize on, but Dark Knight and Guillotine so far has been a good combination. And then I know a lot of people will know Dark Knight Mordred. This doesn't need much of an introduction. What probably does need a bit of an introduction is that you might have played this card, and you know very well that this card sucks at attacking. Like, it is just really, really bad at attacking because it only has 4,000 power most of the time. And yes, unless you're way ahead on board where they don't have multiple, decent sized threats they can block with, this guy probably just dies immediately after removing something. However, if you have a couple Guillotine, you can bump him up to 6k or even 8k. This is a very real threat. Like, Mordred basically should be an X-Rare is what it feels like when you're playing this deck. It is obviously a very good card in other drain or depletion style of decks because of its effect and how it can work with Dark Bishop and Curse Dragon and all that stuff. But now when it's also an effective attacker where like you're not just winning more when you're already kind of ahead on board or at parity, this can help you catch up in some combinations too because of the battle power that it has and just the pushing power. And again, it being a shadow could also come back later on if we get more things like Guillotine that care about the shadow archetype. But then also it is a 5-drop, so it brings back Beldegor, which is really great. And with all that, let's talk about the other two obvious inclusions is Core Drain and Beldegor. So Core Drain is really important here because this is a card that does not get a lot of love, and kind of understandably so, because it can be very difficult to get your opponent to attack. But as you're going to see in these games, the Guillotine does a lot of work and really puts the nails in the coffin against White, right, who needs to stay back. And then against some more aggressive strategies too, if they're already, maybe you don't care about Guillotine because they're going to be attacking you anyways. Core draining and removing 3 cores is going to do a lot for you. And then even then, we're going to have things to draw it back off of the purple smoke. We're going to have ways to pop off the extra ones with Mordred or the Familiars. So really this being able to combo up to 4 core removal is going to catch a lot of players off guard. And then Beldegor, again, it's a shadow. And I know a lot of the times you want this card to die. Like, you want to get in your graveyard, right? You summon it back for its effect. It's a blocker, then it dies. You bring it back the next turn. That's all fine and all. That's totally like normal and what most purple decks are going to be doing. But imagine if now this guy is a 6k or an 8k. So now you're setting up a board where it's like Beldegor 4-drop Nemesis. You attack with Beldegor, who's going to be a 6k or even 8k a lot of times. That's a big boy. It's going to take something out with him. And then if he doesn't die, you go, okay, well, Nemesis is going to attack. Let me just throw my Beldegor back in the trash, draw 2 cards, or heaven forbid, you just use the core removal, right? Strip something of 2 cores, then draw a card off Purple Smoke Valley. Like, there's a lot of really interesting board state that you can set up with this. And then, of course, the 4-drop, you just leave 1 core on whatever it is. If you don't care about it, it dies. It's going to threaten to bring back Beldegor. Now, again, a lot of people do miss this, and I've seen a lot of games where people just make this mistake, but Beldegor has to be during either attack step. So don't do this during your main. Obviously, this, if your opponent has... on their turn, right, they do some type of removal, your Beldegor doesn't come back, it just hides out in the trash, so that's one of the ways to play around it, just remove their units in main, but it's a very strong card, and guess what, it's even stronger when you can put it to AK, so that was a look at the, core of it, but then where are some other areas that it can go to, right? So as I was putting this list together, something else you have to remember that I've talked about in previous videos, actually in the start of the show video, Battle Spirits is all about, in Battle Spirits Saga, is where do you start, where do you want to end up on for your key spirit, and whatever you do in the middle is up to you. So going through just what's available to us, right, if you wanted to have a more even heavier control option, like Pandemonium of the Dark World 7 is insane if you can get his When Destroyed to line up, Cavalier just be a more hand-drawn filter, and then Burst Venom can work out quite well where, yes, your opponent has to destroy the spirit, but if you attack with like a lowly 4-cost, you pop that, Burst Venom goes off, Beldegor comes out, and then suddenly your opponent is going to be losing most of their board. So there's definitely a more control-heavy oriented option that you can put together, or maybe you want to build something more aggressive. Devilish Prankster Imp is kind of insane. Like, I know it's not like that exciting when you look at it at high level, but when you start playing it out and seeing how some of the 1-drops and other things interact with it, it can really mess up your opponent's early board state. And then Poison Mist, if you put that together with the Swamp Nexus that lets you draw cards when your guys die and suddenly you're board wiping them and drawing a bunch of cards, that's obviously going to be really strong as well. And a lot of and as Dark Knight Florence is here, a lot of shadow units have Curse, so that's another thing that you can lean into. So I really like this this is a very rough draft, like 1.0 version of this deck, but there's a lot of flexibility and customization that you can do with this that I think if someone really loves Nemesis and you want to build like that Shadow Knight archetype, there's a lot of stuff here actually in set 1. You need to find out the right ratios because there's, again, so many different options you have available to you. But yeah, honestly, I this was better than I thought it was. Like, purple obviously just being good in general, but Dark Knight Nemesis can pull off some pretty crazy turns. Or again, just allows you to have multiple attacks with Beldegor if you're constantly sacrificing your 4 and 5. So if they don't have an absolute ice shield, suddenly now you're able to chain off 4 or 5 attacks in a turn because of Nemesis. So that's another really fun thing that you can do. And with that, just one more look at the list before we get into the games. Again, I will say there's things like Mumimura where it was just more, again, I wanted more depletion. Bishop, Dark Bishop being obviously Dark Bishop, which is very good for lining up things with either the Earth Spider Demon. I called it a familiar earlier because it's its card type, my bad. Or Mumimura or Mordred. So those things are really good. But I will say in the future, I really like Purple Smoke Valley for what it's trying to do. But once we get towards launch and the core set booster comes out and I think it's called like Feral Slash, the one that blows up a bunch of 4-cost Nexus. I think a lot of purple decks are just going to go to 4 Netherworld Depths anyways. So keep that in mind going forward, where your lineup might just be 4 Abandoned Guillotine, 4 Netherworld Depths, and you cut out Purple Smoke Valley completely. Does feel a little bit bad because of the core drain and getting to draw cards, obviously very good, but if everyone's going to be very heavy on that burst card, which I think is going to be very, very good, then obviously 4-cost Nexus get a lot worse. So with that, hope you enjoyed the high-level overview of this list. Let me know in the comments below if you like this more of this style more than just like the 2 decks going at it, and hopefully you enjoy the games coming up. So with that, let's get into the games. All right, our first match here is going to be against Primitive's Fabled Bees 2-cost deck. We're starting off with our Purple Smoke Valley, trying to get that card advantage off depletion effects. Flying Turtle reveals Freeze-It-All, which is going to go to the trash because it's not a Fabled Beast. But he does have another one, so looking to be a more aggressive start here from the yellow player. Beldegor here being one of the best early plays against a lot of decks, just being able to pop something, gives you a good blocker, and then also, of course, if we want to throw it into the graveyard so we can bring it back later, it does a lot of stuff for us. So here, our Spider is going to be able to strip the last core off the Flying Turtle, and we're able to draw a card off Purple Smoke Valley. So again, this goes to the early card advantage that you can get off Purple Smoke value, which can be pretty nice. And now this also forces our opponent to have 2 cores minimum on any of their spirits, because otherwise our familiar is just going to pop off the extra one. Unfortunately, 2 whiffs off the Cat Sith, which is also always punishing. Here he's choosing to value his Penta more, which I definitely would, because it can give you the free magic. It can help cycle off Friezatol, but does open him up, obviously, to the Cat Sith dying to our attack here, which is then going to draw us another card. So his hand, I'm guessing from this point, must have been pretty bricked because of what he had available to him, not able to play out a cheaper spirit, but now we're able to get Nemesis for value as well. So here we're going to go ahead and pop the Cat Sith, draw another card. And I want to be a bit more defensive here, because I wasn't sure how, even though the Cat Sith whiffed, I don't want to just die to like a random, aggressive hand, because I didn't have a lot to pay for I lose my entire board here if I try to play for Absolute Ice Shield. So leaving up 2 blockers so I can recover the heavy core cost from Nemesis is probably our best bet. And now we have the opportunity to, attack with Beldegor, then pop it with Nemesis if we want to. But the Flamefish is actually a bit annoying here. 4K does a lot against our board. And, I think Flamefish is also a card that you could put into this list because it works, quite well with Dark Knight Nemesis. They obviously don't want to block it because they'll likely lose a unit as well as lose something to the 4K trigger. But at the same time, you can just pop it to Dark Knight Nemesis instead and then still get some value out of it. I think the more when destroyed effects that we get printed in Battle Spirit Saga, this deck really has a chance to pop off. So a little bit of a shortcut here. I was trying to figure out like the best way to get around Flamefish and based on what's in my hand. So we were going to core up and swing. I just kind of announced out of order. And now we're going to go ahead and just sacrifice this just to try to get some card draw value going. And again, now we have enough cores for Absolute Ice Shield anyway, so it doesn't really matter at this point. And this also sets us up for our familiar, where if they attack with Flamefish and we just block and it dies anyways, at least we get Beldegor back. And here we're going to have to force a block anyways, since they decided to go down to 1. So I think this is where, the Cat Sith missing was really unfortunate for him. And then we get our Beldegor back. So trying to save that Flamefish for more defensive options, but we are able to cut off his magic. But now he has a ton of cores to work with, so things can look a little scary from our end. And here he's showing us that he did have a couple cards in hand to break that board state, but because we got the early advantage off the Purple Smoke and had a bunch of extra cards in our hand, it was very unlikely that he was winning, so we just scooped. Going into our next game, I know the icon's a little bit off, so I fix it shortly, but this was his Turbo Rex White deck, which, if for those who have been playing, White is kind of in a rough spot right now until we get out of the tournament packs or EX01, but it's still worth, testing and showing how it can get around some of the armor purple being very, very good and can still put some decks in a bind if they draw properly. So starting off with our Guillotine now, which is actually kind of the card that we want against White because it forces them to attack or that we just get value out of it. And then obviously Netherworld Depths is another very strong start for purple decks in general. Knowing that our opponent's going to be slower, we can't really get punished here for playing out the depths. There's really nothing to worry about from our opponent's side. Gun Knight Heavy Barrel is a card that I like a lot out of White, and I think a lot of people will be having in their sideboards and whatnot, but overall, in this matchup, it hits Beldegor and Mordred, and that's about it. And obviously, between those two, depending on the board state, I guess depending on our draws, we'd rather have Beldegor get hit because we can just have, we only need one Beldegor, right? We can cycle out the graveyard, where something like Mordred, we do actually need that on the board consistently to get its most value, and when it dies, there's no way to bring it back. So those are like the two outs that we gotta, or the two cards that we gotta play around. And then here we just get to core strip one out. So again, no card draw from us because we have Guillotine instead, but we are able to force them in a position where if they block, they are gonna allow us to draw a card off depths, and it will just be a trade here. So White's really biggest issue is that it doesn't have good cost reductions you can play early, and then also it struggles with not having the card draw that you'd want to see. So here we're going to play a core theft just to, and this is a very aggressive core theft to be fair, but I didn't want my opponent to have a board because that's a really hard spot for White to come back from. And then also we were just pitching a Beldegor, so we didn't really care about it being in the graveyard, right? That's a free discard for any purple deck at that point. Curiosity is an actually really good card here because White's going to protect against Beldegor because it can't be destroyed by destruction effects. Here we're going to get another Guillotine, just pumping up our shadows to an insane amount, as you'll see as this game goes on, which again is really important for White. If White can establish a board and then have something like Enterprise and Suppression, well, we can actually get over it reasonably easy with this deck in particular, thanks to Dark Knight Nemesis having a 10k printed. So here he gets aggressive with the Curiosity. We draw a card off Depths. And again, at this point, unless he finds the Burning Force, it's really going to put our opponent in a position where they can't favorably attack or block, and they'll just lose the game over time to the advantage that it gets us. So here we're going to see Dark Knight come in, which again, for just a single core is a 6k attacker. But instead, we're going to pump it up to an 8k just to play around Suppression or things of that nature. Now, obviously, he has the Glass Bear on board, which is what he wants to block with anyway, so he can get a core. But now at this point, we have a setup where if they don't attack, we're going to strip something down to 1 core. If they do attack, we're going to draw a card and guarantee that we're going to kill it off of Dark Knight Palomides. Because again, with just 2 of these Guillotines on board, it's now an 8k, and that's really hard for White to deal with efficiently until they get to their late game. So here, Curiosity is going to attack again, get us another card draw because he's trying to play around the Guillotine, because otherwise we just strip down the Curiosity, and it's very easy for us to kill with what's on board. But then we decide we're going to core drain anyways and draw cards. So again, this is where I mentioned in the overview profile, like these are the board states that you want to force your opponent into. And here's a misplay because I have not played against Peggy in so long that does have armor purple. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that's a thing. That's a way to stop what we want to be doing. So we quickly correct the board state, and I'm up enough where I probably should have just attacked here anyways. Like, yes, you don't want to ramp White too early because then you just help them play out their big threats. But at the same time, I do need to start chipping away at their life, and that Pegasus is only getting bigger as the turns go on. So another Gun Knight Heavy Barrel. Again, really unfortunate that it can only get up to 5k here with 3 cores. But again, you want this thing to die anyways. It's not meant to have high BP. It's something that you want to just leave 1 core on, let it get destroyed, and then get rid of their guy. So again, drawing off Depths. I asked him if there's any pre-block flashes. He declines. We go to blocks. This dies. Beldegor is going to come back. And I think I had the Mordred in my hand at this point, so I wanted to get that off the board. Either had Mordred in my hand or I had another Beldegor. I forget which it is. And I was like, yep, this just needs to get off the board. And chances are the White decks are playing 3 of those max in their main deck. So knowing that was the second one, I feel pretty safe of just getting it off the board so we can clear the way for our other spirits. And now we have our 3rd Abandoned Guillotine. Whew. Yeah, plus 6,000 to this guy. So he's at 10k casually, you know, and then we can get, yeah, we just buff him up to be the biggest unit ever. And there's no suppression. There's no world that saves his unit here. So now at this point, we have basically full reductions online. We have no board for the White player. And he's going to have an Elk here, which is a very good card. Like, don't get me wrong. This is something that's very difficult to interact with if you don't kill it during your main phase, because once they go to block, it is more or less immortal. So we are going to draw 2 cards here, 1 from Depths, 1 for Algavale, and then we're going to draw for turn. And this is where, because it doesn't have, you know, purple protection, obviously Deadly Balance would be really good here. A core theft because we've drawn a bunch of cards, but instead we are just going to go for a Dark Knight Nemesis. And I had to like read this 3 times because it's one of the first games that we had with it, and I just to make sure. But the way that it works, as long as he's level 3, it becomes Deadly Balance plus drawing 2 cards, which is really neat actually in this particular board state. Where again, if you are playing a more heavy attrition deck and you want to go more the controlling route, right? If you have 4 Deadly Balance and 4 Dark Knight Nemesis, you're really going to give your opponent a hard time to keep anything on the board. Now, obviously, that's not going to be effective against like go wide yellow strategies, but against go tall decks like Star Dragons can be a lot of times, or even I guess even some builds of Pterosaur, to be fair. Deadly Balance can really gum them up because it slows them down enough where then they have like Giganorex and one other spirit. But particularly against yellow, you know, Deadly Balance loses a lot of value. Mechatree's trying to dig for some more cards. Notably, it would bounce a 2-drop here, but you know, there's nothing that nothing on our board or nothing that we play, honestly, that's gonna be relevant for the bounce value. Bridget is another card out of white that I am absolutely in love with for the board states it can put your opponent into. This matchup obviously not being a good showcase for it because we can just strip it down pretty easily or get around it. But it's one of those things that it's quite difficult for the slower decks to get around of. So here we're just going to pop Absolute Ice Shield. I think I would have attacked the either way here. I think that was just a small misplay, right? Attack with your Mechatree's to leave Bridget up to get the most value out of it. But, you know, it's all the same. He's probably just expecting that I would attack into it with Dark Knight or something of that nature. Then we have Dread Knight Nemesis, take 2. So yeah, even at this point, just 1 core on him is insanely strong. And then, oh yeah, you know, oh no, Mordred is only a 4K power. Yeah, how about let's make him a 10K for 3 cores instead? So obviously in this game state in particular, we've already done a lot of work at chipping up our opponent's board and making sure they didn't have too much to work with. But now, even if they were able to stabilize and get something like Other Than Elk online, a 10K and core strip each turn is going to be quite difficult for them to deal with. So they have their own Absolute Ice Shield here. They do get the reduction because obviously they're playing white, which is nice. But Dark Knight Nemesis is going to allow us to get more card value, get more card strip on the following turns. Beldegor is going to start coming back once we find another one looping it. Curiosity is, again, pretty good here because it prevents the destruction effect, but we can still core strip it in, and that's fine. And here's where we start to see what normally happens in these games against purple. They say, oh no, we got to stack up our cores because we don't want to get core drained. You know, make it really hard for my opponent to play core theft, or, you know, make it hard for Mordred to get value if we have familiar things of that nature. Here's where we drew into it, so we had to play it from hand and sacrifice one of our guys. So we go to block, then play Absolute Ice Shield to stop the combat. And now yes, I have all these cores on the board. Now we get to do the fun thing of what every purple deck loves to do is going to be Dark Bishop. So a lot of board states will get gunked up by this, where it's like, okay, we gotta put a bunch of cores on, and then Dark Bishop, because he's not a target effect, it's just a blanket effect, right? It's going to strip all of them down to 1 no matter what. And then we can play things like Mummy Mura, which is gonna slowly pick away the board. I think I forgot to draw a card there, but it's pretty dead at this point. Mordred is going to strip another one, and then we're going to core theft away. So that's all 3 spirits gone thanks to Dark Bishop. And then, of course, we win from there. And then the last game we have is versus the big bad himself, Nova. Horn Grizzly, one of my favorite starts out of red because it puts a lot of pressure on your opponent. And then lucky for me, we had Earth Spider Demon that was able to come into play and just chip it away right off the bat. Now, the thing I will note here is that if you're going purely 1-to-1 against red in the early game, you're going to lose 10 out of 10 times because they have significantly better draw power than you. So that is something to be mindful of. And here there was like a little confusion back and forth. I'm saying like, hey, this guy only has, you know, 2K power. So if you have the arc here, like, right, just swing, get rid of it. And then that puts me on 0 reduction anyway. So just cleaning up the board state and kind of, you know, what's the proper play at that point? Like, sure, you give me a core, but you need to get that dark familiar off the board while you have the opportunity to do so for sure. Sitting a burst, bringing back our abandoned guillotine, and then a core drain just to kill it. So it would have been really, really nice here if this was our purple smoke value instead, because now you can see we're getting down. We only have 3 cards left in hand, and that's not a good spot for us. Like, we need to quickly find a depths or something to bring value back. Here he has the Andromeda. This card is just very good. I remember when people thought Andromeda was bad. It was a fun time. So another Guillotine, another Mumimura to trade again. And if this was Purple Smoke Valley, maybe this would have gone a bit differently. But now down to 2 cores. At any point, our opponent hits a draw spell. I mean, they're just going to run away with the game at this point. Yep, and there is the first draw spell. So Ray Needle, it's just a fine blocker at this point, right? It goes up to 4, hits the burst card. And we're going to take it from life. So again, very aggressive start, but also like our hand is not that great. So we're trying to hold back this Mumimura if possible for some type of block. We have the Palomides, so we're able to at least kill the Rain Needle here. And then me just moving all my cores around to make sure we get the value, make sure we have a 5k blocker left, and then have enough to kill the Rain Needle because of the Guillotine doing a lot of work for us. So this is when I realized I have 2 cards left. There is a 0% chance I win if this game goes long at this point. So I just have to pray that we can get value off of getting aggressive, trying to get them down before they establish their combo, or otherwise it's just going to be a very, very quick GG in this round. Again, not hitting any of our key value engines feels very, very bad. Another Andromeda just going big, destroying our Nexus, which is really great. Shrinks our Palomides, gets rid of some of our cost reduction. Andromeda just really hurts a lot, as it turns out. And me just throwing a bunch of cores on stuff because, spoiler, I have stones, nothing in my hand that's worth anything. And I can't even swing over the Andromeda because it's only a 5k versus 6k. And then, of course, whenever Primitive does his little Big Bang slide, I know it's coming when he puts everything off to the side, which makes sense. You gotta make room for your big plays and your big, your big turns. But Star Dragon does what Star Dragons wants to do sometimes. He just couldn't find our window to close the game, and now he's gonna be able to play out his Nova and go up to 5. So again, sacrifice the Seagworm and the Soul Core, heal back up to 5, and now he is going to be able to threaten a board deletion. Or I guess not full deletion, but at least one of them. Which at this point, I mean, it's good enough, right? Like, you've healed back up. I have no cards in hand. I mean, this is how Novas are going to win the game from their side every time. And correctly killing the Palomides just so I can't get value off of trying to swing back and kill the Nova, which could be possible here. But at this point, we have just the Mumimura on board, and sure, we have a lot of cores, but we would need to set up a turn where it's like multiple removals plus a deadly balance to kill the Nova, which we're just not going to be able to find in time. And then we're at 2 life. We have no Absolute Ice Shield, and it's going to be just a very quick GG from this point. Nova is a very, very strong card. And again, unless Purple can be aggressive and close out that early game, you are going to just have nothing that you can come back with, because the comeback potential is all in red between Nova and all the draw cards. So if you want to, play an 11-round event, I gotta say, red is the big choice in my end. So here we're gonna play out some things just to show, like, okay, we have a couple things that we can do. We can strip out some cores. We can at least kill some units, but we don't have enough to end up killing the Nova, which is obviously just gonna delete our board anyways, and then we're just kind of back to 0, as it were, on that point. So here we do have the double removal. He hits a Star Blessed draw as kind of insult to injury, as if we weren't already super dead. But, we'll kill the 2 things that we can, and it's going to be GG after that. So hope you like this new style of video. Definitely make sure to let me know in the comments below if you want to see this kind of format going forward, where it's one deck versus many, and we'll see what we can do. But until then, have a good one. Be safe. We'll see you in the next one.